Yeah, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the folks, and then we'll
Sure.
jump in with some questions.
Yeah, well, my name is Molly Ooten. Pronouns are she, her, hers. I am, as you said, a candidate for Senate in Senate District 22, which encompasses West Edmond, Piedmont, and part of Yukon. It's kind of like a T shape. Um, I decided to run for this district because I really wanted a representative who I knew genuinely cared about these issues, and wasn't doing it for power, prestige, any of those types of things. And what better way to ensure that than to do it yourself? I wanted a representative, who would get back to me with more than just a canned response. So I am a speech pathologist by trade. I got a master's degree from the University of Oklahoma in 2013, and I've been practicing at Sooner Start, which is the state's early intervention program, for the past 6.5 years. I have two kiddos, Henry and Maisie. Henry is 5, and he goes to kindergarten in Deer Creek, and Maisie is 2. Um, I've been married to my husband Michael for about 7 years, and we live here in West Edmond and are eager to do the work of being in community. Regardless of what happens with this election, we are a family that's going to continue to make our voice heard. Um, Knowing what we know now about policy and how good and bad policy impacts our community, it's hard to stay silent. So here I am.
That's one of the better answers of the "Why are you running?" question that I've heard. So I like it. Um,
I forgot to mention as well, I'm,
yeah,
I'm actually getting a second master's degree as well. I don't know why I forget this. It's like, it's not like I'm working on two separate papers for my 6 hours that I'm doing right now, but I'm enrolled at UCO for a master's in public administration as well right now. So got a lot on the
which
plate.
will help prepare you for the job of legislating,
It
which
should. It should.
is
That's
great.
that's my goal. I didn't intend on running a campaign in the middle of it, but here we are.
Yeah. Well, special elections they pop up like that, and
Special
it's
elections. Yep,
good
they come
to
up at unexpected times.
take advantage. So let's jump into some questions.
Yeah.
Uh, we talk a lot around here about kind of the nature and kind of the nature of politics right now and how polarized things are, and the challenges we sort of have. What makes you a good person to run at this time?
I think I touched on it in my introduction, but um, when people hear that I'm a speech pathologist, they're kind of like, how does that relate to public policy? Like people are used to the idea of teachers being involved in public policy now. Um, but speech pathology is a field that is unique because it kind of, traverses the intersection between education and healthcare. That's why I chose that profession in the first place, is because I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a teacher or a doctor. And speech pathology kind of felt like a good little mix of the two. And that mix has played out in my entire career. I've seen, as many of you know, Sooner Start, the early intervention program for the state, funnels into the public school system. So what I've had to learn in the last 6.5 years is, not only how to build trust relationships quickly, because it takes a lot of trust for somebody to let you kind of critique their parenting. What we're our goal is at Sooner Start is to coach parents to implement strategies for language development, feeding, etc., for them to implement the strategies on a more consistent basis. And so when you enter that coaching relationship with someone, you have to have that person who's doing the coaching has to facilitate trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that's absolutely crucial in our legislature. People come in, like you said, in this highly polarized environment with like this, like, I'm going to like bash my ideals into someone else. And that's just not how it works. Like that, you don't get things done. Um, and you certainly don't get them done in a kind, compassionate, productive way if that's how you're coming at it. So a more direct answer to your question is I really think that I have the interpersonal skills. Um, and part of it's who I am. I tend to be somebody who makes friends pretty easily. I get along with most people. My husband is a Republican. We have a bipartisan marriage. Um, I get along very well with my House Representative, Nicole Miller. And I think for me, what stands out in the representatives that I truly admire and respect is how accountable they are to the people, how much they follow through with what they say they're going to do, how available they are to their constituents, and kind of whether or not they put people over ideology. Again, it's across the board. It doesn't matter what letter behind you have behind your name. My priority is always going to be people. Um, and that's what I wanted in a representative, somebody that puts people first, is never so tied to an ideology that they miss out on representing the people or that they miss out on the actual impact um, of policy.
So that's a good segue to my next question. I popped it up briefly before, but I'll pull it up again. So the map of this district is interesting.
Yeah.
It like splits kind of Edmond in half. It splits Yukon in half. Um, it's definitely a probably fairly Republican district. Just based on looking at it.
Yeah.
So the question, it is. So the question, I guess, then is like how using those skills, how do you persuade people that might not agree with you to come over to how you want to govern?
Well, it's a complex process. Part of it involves showing up and showing up again and again and again. If I'm elected, I'm going to go right back out and knock doors again this summer. Um, and I think that when people see you living out your campaign values, they start to be able to kind of trust that you are who you say you're going to be. And we talked about this a little bit before we came on air. Like the word progressive sounds kind of scary. Um, but when you break it down to fundamentally what's happening when you support progressive values, like you're supporting people over politics or partisanship. Um, and my policies are always going to be people focused. And when you talk local instead of national, when you can bring people away from that really destructive national narrative that we've been living through for the past, I mean, really since what, 2015? They're tired of it too. Even if they don't agree with me on every single issue, they're like, okay, well, yeah, I can tell you're not a boogeyman. And I'm like, that's all I need from you. I may or may not earn your vote. Um, but I guarantee you I will keep showing up for those hard conversations. Um, and I will continue to do what I say I'm going to do, which is put people first. And when you vote for, the person over the party, despite what party they're in, when you're voting for that person, you allow that person to put people over partisanship. There's a lot of P words there, but that's my goal is coming into a distinct minority in the state Senate. I actually think that Democrats are better poised to do the collaborative work of government, to well represent this state. Senate District 22 looks heavily Republican, but it is not a monolith. The people here care about public education, which is a progressive value. They care about making sure our teachers are getting taken care of. We have some of the best, like, public school systems in our district. Like, some of them are the very top in the state. We have Edmond, we have Deer Creek, we have Piedmont, we have Yukon. These are excellent public school districts. And almost everyone that you talk to either knows a teacher or is a teacher or has a kid in public schools. They are so impacted and so blessed by the public school system, that it's one of the top priorities, regardless of registration. And I think we all kind of come together, especially in that, but in healthcare as well. I talked about before, kind of healthcare and education, that balance, that mix, that cooperation, like that's been the theme of my life. And I think access to healthcare is something people are starting to realize, oh hey, it's not just me or maybe like there's a better way than me having to pay more for speech therapy in a week than I do for childcare. That's something that I've had multiple families tell me.
Yeah. And yeah, that was going to be kind of my next question is like, what are the sort of bread and butter issues that you're hearing on the doors? So, I mean, healthcare is a huge one that we focus on. I mean, one of our priorities, I think, moving forward, and I think Representative Bennett ran a bill, is about like a public option for sooner care. So, a public option for our Medicaid program.
Yeah.
I can tell you, having a child who actually receives speech therapy, it's pretty
Oh wow.
amazing
Yeah.
having Medicaid as an option, because we're just able to go get the service,
It
and we're
is
not
really awesome.
and we're
And
not stressing about like how much it costs or whether we're going to be able to make rent next month. Like
right,
it's pretty incredible.
right. Like we shouldn't be like, and especially, for a state that prides itself on caring for the middle class, like this is where we're putting the burden of our healthcare costs. And it's actually, there's a lot of um, studies about the fiscal responsibility of public options and how it's actually saving, it would save us money in the long run. I think to that point, something that's inspiring and interesting to me as well is that I really loved working in the Sooner Start model. And the reason is, we as providers got to help determine, it was us and the family, how much therapy a child gets in that program is a decision made by the provider and the family. And it felt so pure. And once I started realizing that other places didn't do it like that, it was like, how can I ever work anywhere else? Like, I need the freedom to be able to say, this child needs, weekly visits, and this child needs twice a month. Like, I need that freedom as a provider. And how are you guys working without that? Like,
Yeah, yeah, no, it's wild because I mean, so yeah, our family grew through the DHS adoption process, and it's just amazing having like half of us or three quarters of us on private health insurance and one of us on Sooner Care, and it's like I would be on Sooner Care tomorrow if I could get on it, because
yeah,
it's just like it takes all of
totally.
the stress out of healthcare. And like even just during COVID, like we went and got flu shots in the fall, and then like a well child visit for our youngest, and it's like I'm getting bills. Like we pay an insane amount for private insurance, and I'm
My,
getting bills
right. It's
for
like, what are,
routine stuff.
it's like, what are we paying for?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
I had great insurance through the state. And what's funny is, like, our definition of great is still like, I had a serious kidney infection last year and I was hospitalized for a week, and we're still paying, like, it's thousands of dollars for like, we're still paying for it, and I have great insurance, like, oh, it's
yeah, and one of the biggest flaws, like with like the Affordable Care Act, is, but I mean, honestly, a lot of people that probably live in your district, it's self-employed people, higher income folks that um, may not have like work for a corporation that provides or a government entity that provides good insurance, like if they're a real estate agent or some other sort of self-employed. Um, so for their families, especially, I feel like the Sooner Care public option would be
I
amazing.
feel very, and this is a very personal issue for me. I had a dear friend, Ruth, who was a restaurant worker, worked at a restaurant, did not have insurance, and therefore couldn't afford the medications and therapy that she needed. And she died by suicide in 2015. And I feel very strongly that she would still be alive today if she had had access to necessary and what would have been life-saving healthcare for her. So like the things that I didn't find, progressivism didn't find me. Like I found it
Right.
like through my building blocks of like, hey, this needs to happen. Hey, this needs to happen. Like it just happens to fall a lot of it under the progressive. Like I'm not so tied to one agenda that I'm missing out on. It is because I'm people focused.
Right.
Like ultimately, what's best for people is relieving some of this burden of healthcare costs, making sure that people have access to mental health care. I mean, I think they're like the larger conversation about healthcare in general is one thing, but especially mental health care. It should not be easier to buy a gun than it is to access mental health care. Like something's wrong there.
For sure. Yeah, and I mean, it's often pointed out in very progressive circles, like, your employer can cancel your insurance at any time. Like, every time you switch a job, you're changing your insurance. So it's like, I actually want the freedom to not have to be worried about my health insurance.
Yeah.
Like, I just want to be able to buy it and forget about it, and then when I need to go to the doctor, I just go. And it's like Sooner Care checks 100% of those boxes,
Uh-huh.
and you know, like then I'm paying for it, but I'm just not worrying about it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's that's I'm glad to hear that that's an issue that people care about. Well, so to transition briefly, and I think it relates to kind of the we talked briefly offline about it. I mean, these are the issues your opponent's talking about, right? Like he's all about healthcare and public education, trying to solve problems, right?
No,
Um,
no. Not
not what?
exactly. I mean, I'm not going to speak for him,
Sure.
but I would encourage you to Google him if you haven't. He's very open about the things that he believes. Um, having said that, this is a conservative district, quote, I think is wrong. Like that's probably the thing that I take issue with the most because this district is diverse. This district is not a monolith. This district is, heavily registered Republicans, but they also really care about taking care of people. Um, they know that public schools are the center of our communities. And ultimately, when you get them to back up off of that national narrative, it's like what do you actually care about? Like you care about having your family taken care of. You care about how much you're paying for healthcare. Um, and there are different approaches to how to make things more um, more affordable. But when you're more focused on individual liberty than you are um, on making sure that everybody gets taken care of, there's bound to be people that fall through the cracks, and that's who I'm concerned with.
Yeah. Yeah, and for folks that don't want to Google it, I mean, it's just all culture war stuff. Like, there's not a single policy or governmental or what problem they are going to fix. It's just pure, just QAnon culture war stuff, which is. I mean, we talk about that stuff a lot on here, just in sort of what is going on. Because we have real challenges, we have real problems. So, what would be your number one problem that you want to take on if you were elected?
Okay, so number one or first?
First, number one,
So
your
like
pick.
if I am elected, I would be coming in at the end of the session. So it's not going to be, I'm not going to be putting forth legislation this go around.
Right.
So obviously when we're talking about the budget, my priority is going to be public funds for public schools wherever possible. And when it's not possible, we need to focus on accountability for the funds that are going elsewhere. There shouldn't be private entities that are held to different standards of accountability than public. We're all receiving the same money, and taxpayers deserve to know where it's going. But one of the pieces of legislation that's closest to my heart that I would hope to move forward, maybe next session, is a mandate for our juvenile judges to receive trauma training. So, as you know, I'm sure you're aware of the statistic that Oklahoma is either first or second, depending on the data that you look at, in adverse childhood experiences. The people that are making, and you know, as somebody who's intersected with the foster system, um, the people that are making decisions about our most vulnerable, especially youth, but across the court system, they're making decisions without being required to know how trauma affects the brain. And I think that there's a movement happening. We wouldn't have started a mental health caucus if we weren't aware of some of these intersections of trauma and policy. But another thing that's very personal to me is um, one of my best friends was involved in the foster system as well and had a decision go, not the way that we wanted. And I think that it would have changed had the judge weighed the trauma differently. And so it's something that, wouldn't be a cost borne by the state, but it would maybe give us a little bit more peace of mind about how educated our judges are on trauma.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's definitely, and it was really interesting going through the DHS process because
Yeah.
it really feels like they understood that because like in the classes, I mean, it was almost in some ways almost like parenting classes, but it was like they were really tried to be real cautious about how they framed these families because most of the classes are reunification, like trying to get families back together. Like there's some adoptive families, but the majority of it's like kinship and foster families, people who are trying to reunify. And it was a really interesting experience. And I thought the
I think,
curriculum was
yeah,
really good.
and I think that social workers are some of the most underappreciated and
Yeah.
overlooked humans in the world.
Yeah.
They deserve way more than we give them. I love the idea of trying to combine the immense talents of the field of social work with the idea of community policing. And we haven't talked a whole lot about criminal justice reform, but that's something I'm really interested in looking into. Is like how do we incentivize social workers to become part of a community policing effort? How do we incentivize the people who are experts in trauma to be some of our first responders? So like there's a lot
Yeah.
there. But trauma informed, training, and I know the first lady has taken some good steps as far as making sure that DHS workers get these types of trainings. We did a training on trauma at Sooner Start about 2 years ago. And so like we're headed there, but we need someone in office like who knows what kind of policy is going to impact this crisis, in a
Yeah.
good way rather
Yeah.
than in a regressive way.
Well, and like the argument we try to make here is like Oklahoma is the number one incarcerator on the planet. Like we incarcerate the most people. We also underfund our systems in dramatic and obvious ways, and it's if that model worked, if mass incarceration of your populace and brutalizing of your people was a successful model for fixing behavior, we should be a utopia. Like we should be like the least crimed place in the whole universe because we are the most brutal to people and we're not. And so it's like you gotta ask yourself, like, in fact, it's almost like the opposite. Like we actually have like harder, cases and it causes like more problems. So yeah, I feel like there is like a little bit of intersection with conservatives on that because they don't want to waste their
True. I
money.
don't want to waste money. That's what I was going
Right.
to say is like there's an overlap there as far as like it's not fiscally responsible. Like there's this whole privatization, movement just in general. And it's kind of a pendulum, it swings back and forth depending on what's trendy. But like if privatization of prisons worked, like why hasn't it, like this has been our model for a while now, like why hasn't it worked? Like why don't we have better outcomes? Why are our recidivism rates like so high? Like clearly something's not working. And I think on a fiscal level conservatives can see that. I also think that there's a lane here to talk about being pro-life. Like, what does that actually mean? You know that that's a word being thrown around by my opponent. And when I think about being pro-life, I think about being pro, inmates' lives. I think about being pro homeless lives. Like, how are we being pro life in every aspect? How are we really caring for people, and not just trying to, make something illegal that puts the burden on desperate women?
Right. Right. Yeah. No. These are the deeper questions we should be asking
Yeah.
ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so one of the questions we got from chat was, what has the response been in your district, and do you feel like you are reaching your vote goals? So it's a very election focused question, but
Yeah.
it's a good one. I like it.
Um, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. It's like people are really hungry for the message that I'm bringing, which is like, let's step out of this narrative and get back to, hey, what's good for everybody. Um, and I, like, more than anything, I just think I'm the vehicle that happens to be bringing it here. Like, people were ready for this message all before I even started. And you can tell because they get excited. Like, they get excited when somebody's coming to their door. A lot of them have not had their door knocked at all.
Yeah.
I met a woman, I mean, I've met multiple people who've lived in their house for 20 plus years, but specifically one lady in Edmond was just almost to tears. She had lived in her house for 23 years, had never been knocked by a candidate, elected official, anything. 23 years. Um, and just like no one's ever had a conversation with me. Like no one's ever made me feel like my voice mattered. Um, and I think it's really unfortunate that we have that history, but it's changing. And regardless of what happens on Tuesday, we will have made strides for voter engagement that I think are extraordinarily important for this community. People want the opportunity to feel like they have a voice in community. They want the opportunity to give back. They want the opportunity to interact with somebody who makes decisions about policy that impacts them. Um, and so yeah, I mean it's really been good and wholesome and positive. I mean, there's always going to be the outliers.
Sure.
There's going to be the people that yell at you, but the overwhelming majority is positive, and they definitely make it worth it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges in the current discourse is like there's this sort of like pitting. It's like us versus the government, and it's like, no, guys, like we need the government to work. Like we need it to do its jobs. Like we need it to pave roads and run schools, and like it actually helps us if it works better. And so when you put these people in there that hate government or are reactionary, I mean, like, one of the, just to, talk about, and we can kind of wrap up here, what's going through right now. I mean, they're swapping out bills to target, trans youth. They're like, we've been focused on like these anti-protest bills. And it's like, while everyone can have different opinions about the right to protest, maybe we should talk about the things that people are protesting about and why, instead of trying to make laws that encourage bad behavior, bad actors to take
And while
extreme
we're
measures.
at it, like speaking of protecting constitutional rights, we don't get to pick and choose which constitutional rights we protect. Like,
It's very
protest is a
inconsistent. It's very inconsistent.
constitutionally protected right.
Yeah.
So I think that, I mean, it just looks really partisan to me. And it's sort of the same thing with like the COVID-19 pandemic. Like, this is not a partisan issue. Like, being able to protest what you want to protest shouldn't be a partisan issue. This is like, if it were you wanting to protest, you would want that right. If it were you needing to protest, which many conservatives have, they would want that right. So I don't get it. Like with COVID-19, like the virus doesn't care what letter you have behind your name. We're not trying to push an agenda. We're just trying to respect science. And I always am going to trust the doctor that lives next door or the PA across the street over something a politician says on TV or something I read
Right.
on the internet.
Yeah. I it it is one of the great mysteries of this whole thing that it became so politicized
Yeah,
in weird ways, like
weird ways. Like, should we
exceedingly
be uniting behind
a common enemy.
a
Yeah, like
common enemy? Right.
it's us versus virus, guys. Like like we don't have to fight each other on this one. It's just the
Yes.
virus is definitely the bad guy. Like we
Yes.
know,
Amen.
we all agree on this. Yeah, it is a sad state on that. Yeah, and then I mean, so your opponent has leaned into that in a big way. Um, yeah, what can people do to help? We're kind of coming near the end. Like I said, folks, you can Google him. I mean, you don't need to because it's Jake Emerick, I think. But he is extreme on all this stuff. And I mean, I think in the few minutes you've gotten to hear Molly, I think you can agree that thoughtful, rational person that will do good things. How can people help? How can people get involved?
Well, donations are always accepted. It is, the final weeks. Obviously, we have one weekend to drop a whole lot of literature on people's doors. So, digital ads are the only other really thing that we're doing right now. So, I mean, digital mail and then volunteer work. So obviously you can volunteer this weekend, but I know it's kind of short notice and it's Easter weekend. The county convention is this weekend, so I know there's a lot going on. Probably the most practical thing would be a donation, which you can do at mollyyooten.com/donate, and that will get digital ads right out immediately. We're able to kind of target on Facebook our voter list. So yeah, there's a lot to do, but we're coming up on the end. I'm grinding through.
That's good. No, that is the nature of the beast. It
Yeah.
is. It's a lot of work, and we definitely appreciate you for
Yeah.
taking it on. Any closing thoughts? Anything you want to?
We've about said it all. I mean, I hope that my authenticity in how much I care about this community shines through, because ultimately that's my focus.